The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
Well, we are now officially a full 1 week into the NBA season. I know we talked about sort of the 1 week analysis on yesterday's show, but that was 6 days, and now we have 7 in the books. It's been a weird 7. Hope you enjoyed our conversation with Alex Rickleen on yesterday's show about sort of what things are real and what are not, because that is, without question, the big piece of the puzzle at this part of the season. At this stage of the year, what's a mirage and what's reality? That was the key topic of yesterday's show. It's something we're going to be following. It's a thread we're going to be following here for the first couple weeks of the season as well. And we'll probably touch on some of that on today's show. Welcome to Fantasy NBA Today, everybody. I'm Dan Besbris. You know your gracious host. I think at this point I am at Dan Besbris, DANBESBRIS. Last year, I've not spent any time in the military because, frankly, in a week, I would probably just melt or perish of my own accord. I couldn't handle it. But I did look up the military call signs for the different letters of my last name. So if you're trying to spell it, it's Bravo, Echo, Sierra, Bravo, Romeo, India, Sierra. I did that on last year's shows, and people thought it was funny, so I'll do it again. Again, that's at Dan Besbris on Twitter if you want to give me a follow. This is a Hoop Ball presentation. Hoop-ball.com is the website. Hoop Ball Fantasy and Hoop Ball Tweets are the two Twitter handles for that bad boy. What's on tap for today's podcast? Well, we have an interesting guest on today's show coming up in just a few minutes. Mike Apotria over at Hoop Ball. He is the DFS expert. He's going to teach us a little bit. It's going to be a DFS 101. Figured we'll do that here right at the beginning of the season. We're going to have Mike back on the podcast probably 2 to 3 times a month just to sort of give us the next lesson. And by hopefully the midway point of the year, I think we'll all be a little bit more confident, maybe try our hand at some of those cheapo leagues or even the free ones. Play the free ones just to sort of get your feet wet. Because I know I do so much basketball watching and fantasy watching and league pass watching that it seems a waste for me to not get involved, at least in some small way. Where I realize I don't have the mathematics chops or the algorithmic stuff. I don't have the giant Excel spreadsheets punching away to compete with the big dogs of the DFS world, because the guys that are really winning the big money are the folks that are using big processing power. But for those of us that just want to do it with, our own little brain, there are a lot of cheap leagues where you can just sort of get in there, the 50-50 stuff, and be in the top half. It's doable. So we're going to learn how over the course of this year. That's going to be coming up on today's podcast. Quick look at some of the storylines from Monday night. Again, we're not breaking down every box score like we did last year. That is just not a thing on this podcast anymore because we have the box score breakdown at Hoop Ball. My good buddies, Adrian Benjamins, Neil Rochlani, are putting together the box score breakdown, which comes out within an hour of the end of the games every night. Sunday through Thursday, this show airs. Sunday night through Thursday night. Friday and Saturday evenings are basically the weekends for those two cats. So, you had one on Sunday night. You had one come out last night. It's right after the games end. So it's breaking down the results as they're happening. In fact, in talking to Adrian and Neil and getting a feel for how they're doing it, just because of how schedules are funky these days, and Neil's on Central Time and Adrian's on West Coast Time, they record half the podcast at about 8 o'clock Pacific Time when all of the Eastern and Central games have gone final, and then they record the last little bit, the other half, when the West Coast games go final. Because what they've done is they've shaved a half an hour off the release time. It's brilliant. It's the type of energy, enthusiasm, it's the type of dedication that all of the folks at Hoop Ball give, and it's why I'm so proud of what we've got going on over here. I mean, this is like, you're splitting hairs a little bit, right? Where if the podcast comes out at 11 Pacific time, that's still pretty damn good. That's an hour after the game's end. But if they record the first 30 or 40 minutes at 8 o'clock, from 8 to 8:40, and then they only have to do the last 20 minutes from 10 to 10:20, you can get that show by 10:40. Those little bits make a difference. Those of us that go to bed at 11 o'clock can listen to some of the show beforehand. Those of us that go to bed at midnight can listen to the whole show before we go to sleep. Those of you on East Coast time, it'll be there when you wake up in the morning. It is awesome. It is an unbelievable tool. I hope you guys are checking that out. I know I've been talking about it a lot, but it's a big deal. And we've got it for you at Hoopball this year. We didn't in seasons past. We do now. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Neil. You guys should follow those dudes on Twitter, by the way, at Adrian Benjamins and at Ball with Neil, Neil. So again, that's why we're not going to go over every box score as they happen. I think this podcast this season, my goal is to get more voices on the show, which we have done over the last 2 months. My goal is to spend more time looking towards the future, which I think is one of the biggest things for a show that airs at like 10, 11 a.m. Pacific time. Most people have already made their decisions for their roster by that time during the day. You've made your moves already when you listen to this podcast. But what you're looking for in this show are big strategic stuff, trade advice, deep dives on individual teams, and what to watch for on the coming night, both from a gambling and a fantasy standpoint. So that's what we're doing this year. We're a two-pronged situation here with Box Score Breakdown and Fantasy NBA Daily. You've got both sides of your thing covered. We're your pregame, they got your postgame. It's a beautiful thing. So what we're going to do first on today's podcast, quick look at some of the storylines from Monday night. Then we'll talk to Mike, and then we'll get into the Tuesday evening card, which is a much shorter one, but still have some thoughts, things that we can kind of turn our attention to. Storyline number one from Monday night had to be Jonathan Isaac. It was something we were watching for going into yesterday's games. I said it on yesterday's podcast. Hey, I'm watching Jonathan Isaac tonight. I want to see some small steps, and we got big ones. He was awesome. He still only played 26 minutes, which I think is to be expected. You know, Jonathan Simmons is going to play some minutes, take a few minutes away from him. Aaron Gordon, as they move guys around from different positions. Terrence Ross. There are guys that are going to nab a few of those Isaac minutes, but I think we were all deluding ourselves if we thought someone with an injury history and in his second year was going to be logging 32, 35 minutes a game, especially at the first part of the year. Still, he was spectacular. I mean, really nothing short of spectacular. 18 points, 12 rebounds, a steal, 2 3-pointers on 8 out of 12 shooting, no turnovers. Would have enjoyed a block. But you know what? In a game where Orlando won 93-90, a super low-scoring game, he was a pillar of efficiency. He and Nick Vucevic didn't make mistakes. And in a critical moment, I don't know if you guys saw this, with Orlando up 1 with about a minute to go, Isaac pump-faked a three-pointer, got the defender to run by, stepped inside, and canned about a 19-footer. It was beautiful. D'Angelo Russell might have some cold water in his veins at times, but that was ice water. That was ice. That was ice in Isaac's veins. Call him Jonathan Ice-ick. Where's my rim shot? So, hope you guys held. I mean, everybody, literally every fantasy site that I saw said hold Jonathan Isaac. And I know people were having trouble, but it was 6 damn days, people. So now you got a taste of some of the good stuff that can come out of it. Charlotte-Toronto was a blowout, but Danny Green watch was a success. Still logged 27 minutes, even in a blowout win. He would have probably seen another 6 or 7 at the end of the ballgame if they needed him. Posted 16 points, 6 rebounds, 2 assists, a steal, 2 blocks, 4 3-pointers on 6 out of 8 shooting. Brilliant line for Daniel Green. We love this guy. We have one more bullet to dodge, and that's the return of Delon Wright. I believe a lot of Wright's minutes come out of the Norman Powell bucket. You will see some most likely come from OG Anunoby and some from Danny Green. My hope is that with the minutes being pulled away, maybe even a couple from CJ Miles, you still see Danny Green around 30 instead of maybe 33. I think that's a best case scenario. It seems almost unavoidable that a couple of minutes are going to get shaved off of his game. But he looks great next to Kawhi Leonard and Kyle Lowry. He's getting open looks. He's taking them. He's making them. And he's just doing all the stuff that we remember from 4 years ago. So let's hope we got one more hurdle, as I said. If we can get over that last one, we might have a top 60 guy for the year that we picked up after that first game. And he's an old man squad member, that's for damn sure. You can throw out most of the results on the Charlotte side. 2 of their guys actually played starter-level minutes. That was Kemba and Nick Batum. Kemba sort of survived because he's been great so far this year, but the rest of the team was hot garbage. Hot garbage yesterday. They just got waxed. Everybody looked bad. Nice to see Willie Hernan-Gomez get 18 minutes. I'd like to see him get more, but they just keep going small. Center minutes got soaked. Frank Kaminsky played 5 minutes at center yesterday. Bismack Biyombo got some garbage time minutes. They got to make some decisions, I think, although I still think Charlotte is going to be a nice over bet for the year. They just ran into a Toronto team that, man, they look like they've been playing with Kawhi for years and Danny Green. It's just seamless. Surprised me. I thought they might have a couple hiccups right out of the gate. Indiana, we were watching to see if the starters would actually play starters minutes, and they got closer in a very low-scoring game. Weird one. Nobody could shoot in Minnesota. Miles Turner was okay. Bojan Bogdanovic actually had one of the better games of the night, which tells you all you need to know. Thad Young was actually on his way to an okay ball game and then missed a bunch of shots, but he was closer. Darren Collison, everybody's pretty annoyed with right now, and I don't blame you, but I'm definitely holding on. Tyreek Evans had arguably the worst game of anybody that played yesterday. 1 for 5 with 2 turnovers? Brutal. But if you look at Darren Collison's game and you really peel this thing apart, he was actually about 2 made shots and a made free throw away from having a perfect Collison. What's a Collison, you ask? Well, 10 to 12 points, 2 to 4 rebounds, 4 to 6 assists, 1 to 2 steals, a 3-pointer on good percentages. But he just missed his shots yesterday. Was it Jimmy Butler? Was it Jeff Teague? It's tough to say. I will say Minnesota's backcourt's actually been doing a pretty good job on opposing guards so far this year. But Collison he went 1 for 6 from the field and 3 for 4 at the foul line. If he makes all of his free throws, he's usually better than 75%. And if he makes half his shots, that's 4 or 5 extra points from the field, 1 extra point at the free throw line. So you're talking about 11, 4, and 6 with 2 steals, maybe a 3-pointer, 50%, 100%, 2 turnovers. Maybe that was 1 too high for our liking. But that's what you drafted him for. You didn't draft Darren Collison for a 20-10 game. You drafted him because generally he shoots 48-ish% from the field, 80 to 90% at the free throw line, low turnovers, some assists, some steals, and a 3-ball. And that's about it. He's a quiet 9-cat guy. And when a quiet 9-cat guy goes into a slump, they get really quiet. So just wait a little bit. Indiana's a team that, for whatever reason, I ended up with a bunch of Pacers across my fantasy rosters, even though I'm fading this team overall. And you heard on my gambling podcast back in August, I said, look, this is a team that took a giant leap forward last year. They're due to regress because teams have game planned now. They have a whole offseason of scouting report. And I do think you see some regression here from Indiana. And yet, somehow, I have half of the damn roster on my team. But you got to wait this thing out. Don't do anything crazy. Thad played the second most minutes on the team yesterday at 33.5. So he's still a guy on the roster. Sabonis played. So if you're worried about that aspect of it, they need Thad Young. He's their best defender. Yes, better than all these other guys. He's in the passing lanes kind of dude. They're going to be okay. It's just taking a little bit of time. Mario Hezonja was a storyline from yesterday. He played 30 minutes with Kevin Knox out. Even though with Knox out last game, he still only logged like 10 minutes. So what changed is the question. Well, Alonzo Trier didn't play nearly as much. Is that where the minutes come from? Are we going to finally see Lance Thomas retired to the annals of history? Ntilikina still played a bunch. Trey Burke actually didn't play all that much, but he was extremely efficient in his minutes. But this is certainly an interesting development on the Hezonja front. He was being dropped in every single league, and for good reason. He was logging 10 minutes a game. I don't know if this is just because of Kevin Knox, or maybe he did something that ingratiated himself to Dave Fizdale. He's probably going to start getting scooped up again in leagues where he was dropped after one game. Yeah, I know. It's just how it happens. I'm inclined to pay very close attention to Hezonja's next ball game. So I don't have the Knicks schedule directly in front of me, but I can find it very quickly. That's the magic of the internet as we go through this podcast. And say, look, when the Knicks play tomorrow, it's Wednesday, they have their next game in Miami. 7:30 Eastern time start, so it's an relatively early game. I watched the first half of that game. If Hezonja plays 15 minutes in the first half, I'm picking him up at halftime. Simple as that. I don't even need to see the end of the game. If it's now going to be he's playing, then I'm grabbing him because he is a great per-minute guy when he's on the floor. Steals, threes, he can score for you. Percentage is usually okay. We saw it in Orlando. He was excellent when he got playing time last year. But I'm not going to start him in his next ball game. If you have someone on your team that you can just dump and just hold Hezonja and put him on your bench for his next ball game to see how it goes, I might even consider that, just because he does have the ability to kind of grace the top 50 if for a short term. So I put him in that bucket. He's in the, I'm going to probably watch him one more game, but if you have something that's just garbage at the end of your roster, like Boban, a lot of you picked up Boban, even though I told you not to, cut him loose, throw Hezonja in that spot, leave him on your bench for 2 days, and if he plays great in their next game, then you start him, the next one. We were watching Wesley Matthews, which I mentioned on yesterday's podcast, and he played well. 20 points, 4 3-pointers, 2 steals. His field goal percentage always going to be terrible, but he should be owned in all leagues right now. We also were watching Mo Harkless. He seems pretty much stuck at 19 minutes a game, and that's a shame, because if he could get healthy and play more, it might be worth deploying. Nick Stauskas got 30 minutes in that overtime game. Scored 15 points. I'm still not buying it. The 8 rebounds felt fluky. Portland had 70 rebounds in that game. And on an overtime game, the two teams combined to take 218 shots, plus the free throws. So that's an insane number of rebounds. Nurkic had 18. Aminu had 15. I know the pace is up this year, but that was nutty. That was crazy. Markieff Morris is going to get picked up in a lot of leagues, but still we're waiting on Dwight Howard. He might miss another week, Dwight. I guess we'll see. And so Markieff will be fine until that happens. They're playing him at center right now. So that's good. You want to throw him out there, stream him? I'm okay with that. He'll be good for a couple days. You just have to make sure that if you get news Dwight is in, you get Keith out of your lineup as quick as possible. And, I watched the Laker game, which you guys know, to see how things would go. I actually remain wildly encouraged. I know LeBron missed 2 key free throws and a possible game winner, and they kind of crapped this thing away in overtime. But they didn't really have a whole lot of business getting to overtime anyway. They had a wild comeback. LeBron hit a long three-pointer to tie the game at the end of regulation. The news really from that ball game is Kuzma went big with Ingram and Rondo out. He's a sell high after a big game like that. Josh Hart is not really a sell high. He's just good. Lonzo Ball played really well again. I mean, this is a team that as they start to figure out how to defend somebody, they also desperately need another center because JaVale McGee can't play 25 to 30 minutes a night. It's too many for him. He'll break. He looks awesome, though. I love JaVale so far. Over on the Spurs side, Aldridge, Rudy Gay, DeMar DeRozan, kind of the usual suspects. You saw a lot of three-pointers coming out of the other dudes like Bellinelli and Bryn Forbes, but if you're expecting anything beyond threes, you're just not going to get it. I'm sure there are other things that happened yesterday, but to me, they were not the big storylines. Those are the big ones. If you have questions, you can tweet them at me. You know I'm looking at the internet basically all day long. Before we get into what's coming up on Tuesday night, I want to have our first lesson in DFS. I'm excited. Let's do it. So this is kind of cool, and it's something I've wanted to do more of on this podcast and haven't really either had A, the time, B, the resources, or C, the complete lack of dignity to get a lot of things wrong. But today I have all of those things. A, the time being that our gracious guest, who I'm about to introduce, was willing to record in the hour between my child's dinner and my child's bedtime the previous evening. B, the resources, because we have a reliable DFS guy who likes to podcast. And 3, well, over time you lose your dignity, and I just don't have any left. So want to welcome into the show Mike Apotria. Am I pronouncing that right? I think I got that right.
You hit the nail right on the head. You're good. One of the first people to probably do it on their first try.
Well, it's a rookie mistake to not ask before starting the button, but I was like, screw it. I really like this intro, so we're rolling with it. Mike is, of course, a DFS expert here at Hoopball. You're just a fantasy degenerate when it all comes down to it, but we're going to pick your brain on the degenerate side, on the DFS degenerate side, I should say. But welcome to the podcast, my good man.
I'm glad to be here, Dan. Thank you for having me. Something I'm glad to do with Hoopball. I've been writing articles here for a little over a year, and DFS is one of the many things I do. It's probably a thing I'm more geared towards in the fantasy aspect, but I'm here to offer advice on all grounds.
I'm noticing a very slight accent. Are you an East Coast fellow?
I am. I'm from Connecticut, New Haven, Connecticut, right here, born and raised.
There you go. I thought I caught like a little New York, maybe a little Jersey. Is New Haven close to New York?
I'm like an hour away. I'm like right in between New York and New Jersey. If I go an hour in each direction, it's pretty close either way. I'm actually from the city that is the most popular pizza capital in the world. Actually, the street I work on has 4 of the top 10 pizza places in the country on it.
Holy hell.
It's a pizza place.
So are you, does that put you near Stamford?
I'm about 40 minutes from Stamford, pretty close, right around there. So Stamford's a city that a lot of people in Connecticut live in to commute to New York.
Yeah,
so if you live in the city of New York, it's a quick train ride.
Yeah, that's why I
asked. Traffic.
I got a buddy out that way. You guys got a whole bunch of minor league baseball teams out that direction too. That's my old world. I think you got the Bluefish, right? Independent league team not too far from you.
Yep, that's right. I actually I worked a few Bluefish games in my day when I was in college, and I was doing a few internships for local networks.
Attaboy. He is at Mike Apotria on Twitter. It's Apotria. I didn't spell Mike for you. I figured you guys can figure that one out yourselves. So what I want to do on today's podcast, and over time, Mike's going to be on the show fairly regularly here throughout the season, is kind of like a DFS masterclass where we're going to work our way from day 1 to day whatever, and we'll just sort of introduce new concepts along the way. And hopefully by the end of the year, people that are listening to the show for the full season stuff would also feel comfortable, maybe even taking a shot at sort of dabbling in the DFS side a little. I think you and I are also going to be talking about regular fantasy along the way because you follow that as well, and it comes up, obviously, when you have to do the DFS stuff. But as I said with number 3 a moment ago, there's a chance that I might do something that whatever little dignity I have left vanishes into thin air, and that is I might ask a pretty stupid question. So everybody beware. I'm going to try to ask the questions that I think the people listening would want to ask in that moment, and it's easy for me because I don't know a whole lot about it either. So and I know this is like the basic of the basic, what is DFS? What is daily fantasy? How does it work?
So daily fantasy sports is very similar to season long in the way that you assemble a team and you try to beat the competition, you try to win, almost more or less in like a points league, as opposed to like a rotisserie or head-to-head where each player will accumulate a certain amount of points, the total points wins. But the difference being is that in daily fantasy sports, you draft a different team every day and you get a base salary. Depending on the site, there's multiple sites. There's DraftKings, who we're partnered with. There's also FanDuel, Yahoo, FanDraft. The list goes on. But, for DraftKings' sake, we'll say they allow you $50,000 as your base salary. And, you pick a player pool between a point guard, shooting guard, small forward, power forward, center, another guard spot, a forward spot, and a utility spot. And you have to use this base salary and try to get the best lineup that you possibly could. And these players, their values, their prices, everything fluctuates based on play. So they're just like almost like there would be in a season-long aspect. You see a guy that you might look at in a season-long league as a buy low. Well, he's probably going to be a lower price on salary. And if you think in a season-long league he's a buy low, well, this might be a good time to play him at a cheap price during DFS. And the same thing goes as a sell high. If you see a guy that in your league, well, this guy's playing a little over his head, maybe not pay up for him that day on DFS and kind of lay low. There's a lot more that goes into it, but I guess that's probably the quickest and the most basic way I can explain it.
Okay, so if somebody was just looking to get into DFS for a first time, I believe I've heard that there's sort of two general types of leagues you can get into. What are those, and what are the differences?
So the two basic leagues, before you break it down into other smaller branches, are going to be GPPs, and then there's cash games. So cash games are going to be your 50-50s, your double ups, the things where the games, the contests, the tournaments where you don't need to finish in the top, let's say 18 or 20 percentile in order to cash out. 50-50s, for example, if there's 100 people in the league, the top 50 people finish. So, and everybody gets the same payout in those leagues. It's a 50-50. So whether you finish in first place or in 50th, you're going to win the same amount. So you're not necessarily going to be as risky and take as many chances and, maybe play that bench guy getting 24 minutes in a good position and a good role and a good matchup. Necessarily go for the guys that are going to be the starters, playing good minutes, playing secured roles that you're not so worried about on that night. And then you have the tournament plays, which is the opposite. Like I said, it's the mass field tournaments. It's the ones that everybody sees on TV. Everybody wants to win. The ones where you can win $50,000 to $100,000, $25,000. But there's also 60, 70 to 100,000 people in these tournaments. And finishing in the top 50 percentile is just not going to be enough. You need to finish in the top 18th percentile. And that's just to win a little bit of money. So if you were to do, like tonight, for instance, is a mass $8 tournament, and I believe first place is $50,000. So even if the lowest you can win is $14 in that tournament. $14 isn't as much as you're going to win in a 50-50 if you finish in the lowest bracket in the 50th. You're really gunning for the top half in that, the top 17th percentile. So you really want to get to that top 1% in the tournament and make your money back with one of those big finishes, whether it's 1,000, 2,000, 20,000, 50,000, whatever it is. If you're playing a tournament, you're really gunning for the top. So you're going to be a little riskier. You're going to take more chances.
Okay, so what does that mean? Be riskier?
You're gonna go with guys that are lower owned. You're playing 60, 50,000 people, and you want to separate yourself from the competition. There's going to be plays that are obvious. Opening night, Andre Drummond versus the Nets. For instance, let's just say, or not opening night, opening main slate, I guess you could say. That's an obvious spot. A lot of people would look at that and be all over it, and for good reason. He went out there and he put up 20-20. And there's other spots where you can look, though. And, Andre Drummond's going to come out that night, and he might be 25, 30% owned. And, he puts up 50, 60 DraftKings points. That's absolutely fantastic. But if you can look at the slate and you can see somebody who's maybe, even the same price or cheaper than Andre Drummond, who you think is going to do just as well, if not better, in that same spot at a lower ownership, it separates you from the competition. Avoiding players who are chalky plays. I think it was on the second or third game when, the first couple of games that Chris Dunn was out, we saw Cameron Payne starting. A lot of people flock to that. A lot of people think, this guy's going to be a starting point guard. He's dirt cheap on DraftKings or FanDuel. Plug him in right away. And that's one of those situations where maybe you look at it and you fade that situation. Because if 40, 30% of the people in this competition are going to own Cameron Payne and he underperforms, or you're ahead of the competition. You're ahead of 40% of those people now.
Mike, let me jump in and ask you a follow-up question on that topic. How do you know that everybody is jumping on Cameron Payne? Is there a way to see that he's being utilized a lot?
There's no direct way. I mean, there's a few sites that offer subscription services where, they have guys who analyze all the other websites, other sites, and they kind of get a feel of all the experts and who the experts are on. And that gives people a general understanding of where you're on. But for the most part, it's kind of just knowing it. And I hate to say it as much as that, but check your sites, check Hoopball. You'll see a lot of people checking it, posting it. I post it as much as I can. A lot of the times I write articles, and even if I jump on a podcast and I were to do a preview, I would mention, this guy's a great play. I love him all over him. He's going to have high ownership. So know that, if you're doing multiple lineups, sometimes fading a guy with high ownership is worth it. And then there's some plays you can't fade. Tonight we peaked at the Lakers game before we came on, but I plugged Lonzo Ball in a ton of lineups knowing that all these suspensions were going to be happening. They said there's no minute restriction. That's one of the guys where it's kind of tough to fade him. So you have to ride it out. And I would say just do your best judgment, roll around, look around on different websites, get a good feel of the experts in the league. And if you just have a gut feeling where, oh, I have to play that guy, do a general look over the slate. And if you see a guy that's just popping out in these obvious spots, great, fantastic matchups, odds are they're popping out to everybody else as well. So those are the ones that maybe you take a step back on when you look at your lineup or a few of your lineups. See if you can gain an edge by maybe avoiding that guy. But if he's in that dream spot and you feel like you can't avoid him, or again, if it's a 50-50, you're not worried, or one of these cash games, you're not worried about finishing in first, second, or third. You just need to finish in the payout structure. So in those contests, I would say focus less on separating yourself and more or less on getting those strong cash plays.
That's when you're saying focus on less on separating yourselves. Did you mean that for the 50-50s or for the tournament?
For the 50-50s and the cash games. As far as like the 50-50s, you're not worried about separating yourself as much. You want to be solid and stable throughout your whole lineup. You're not like, and a good example is tonight, like Lance Stevenson was probably a stronger tournament player than a cash game. He was only 3,800 on DraftKings. We expect him to see a slight minutes increase with all these suspensions and everything else. But at the same time, it's Lance Stevenson. He can easily have a terrible game. When you're doing a cash game or a 50-50 lineup, generally you're making one lineup for multiple contests. That one lineup is going to be your core lineup that you're going to structure throughout multiple contests in DraftKings or FanDuel or wherever you're playing. So you're really, really banking on that being your strong lineup. It's when you're doing the tournaments and the GPPs and the high dollar tournaments that we're trying to get in there in that first, second, and third, where you're entering multiple lineups, where you're going to be taking the shots on your Lance Stevensons. And another good example for tonight's slate was a lot of people took a shot on Michael Kidd-Gilchrist. He was severely underpriced at 3,700, and he didn't have a great game. So those are the games you don't want to have one lineup in a cash game and take a shot on a guy that's a low chance, a high risk, high reward chance kind of guy, because it can really sink it. And if that one lineup's entered in multiple contests, you're going to sink all your lineups for that night.
So let's take this sort of in a different direction, a different exercise. If you were to, let's kind of reverse engineer, if that makes sense. Let's sort of reverse engineer a lineup for your team based on what's going on Monday night. So, when you go into your Monday card creation, when you start to do this stuff, and don't worry, folks, I know I'm a hair confused myself, and that's why we're gonna keep sort of pulling this thing together.
I apologize. I mean,
it's hard. It's hard to do in bits, but that's what we're gonna do. That's why we're gonna take this. We're gonna build it up. I don't want people to feel like they can go play after one, half an hour podcast. I want them to be enjoying this as the season goes along and kind of building that almost through osmosis a little bit, the knowledge of how this game works and, what people actually have an edge on things and what folks are just getting beaten out of the gym on the DFS side. So when you look back, you mentioned Lance Stevenson, and that game, as we record this show, is actually still going right now, so that's a tough one to use as an example. A couple of the late games are still on right now. It's like 8 some odd Pacific time on Monday night. If you were going to go back and sort of recreate your lineups for Monday based on what you know now after the conclusion of most of these ball games, how does that information kind of help you going forward? Like, who are the cheap guys that ended up having really nice games that maybe we should have used? Or who are the superstars that were overpriced or underpriced? How do you look at the end of a card and say, and compare that to how the pricing structure worked going into the day? That's something that always confused me about DFS, where it was like, well, you need to hit this mark at this price. So how do you reverse engineer a card to kind of learn from a day gone by?
Okay, yeah, definitely, Dan. First of all, like one of the first things I look at when I'm going onto a site is I look at the over-unders, I look at the game totals. You generally want to try to target the games with the higher game totals. The more points scored, the more fantasy points will be scored, the more rebounds, assists, so on. And, you want to try to also look at these spreads and maybe avoid the games that are, high spreads to avoid blowouts. You want every play that you play to play 4 quarters. You want to try to get as much time on the court as you could. A popular DraftKings or DFS saying is minutes equal money. And that's one of the main things you're looking at when you're targeting. And it also comes with usage. But if I were to go back and look at it, we'll look at the first game, and it's the Celtics versus the Magic. And this is a game I wasn't too high on coming into the night. I mean, I thought there were some plays that for tournaments, like I said, if you're going to make multiple lineups, of course you have to look at and debate. And, Nikola Vucevic being one of them, Aaron Gordon being the other. I really wasn't too high on DJ Augustine coming into the night for DraftKings or DFS. It's because him and Jeremy Grant have been kind of chopping that minutes up and down a little bit. And we have to also look at Isaac's huge game. That if I can look back on the night, he's easily one of the cheap guys I'd have to have in my lineup. 18 and 12. I believe his salary was $4,200 coming into the night. And that just absolutely smashes his salary. So he was the guy that, if we look at the tournament lineup, the tournament winning lineup tomorrow, I would not be surprised if he was on the tournament winning lineup.
Interesting. Okay.
He absolutely crushed. And Evan Fournier being the other 14.6. It's a very un-Evan Fournier-like game. And a lot of people, I mean, Celtics have one of the best perimeter defenses in the league play. He wasn't a guy I was high on. But for that reason, again, a lot of people probably looked at it and thought the same thing. And so he was probably very low owned. And even though Vucevic probably had a better overall game, Evan Fournier was probably $2,000 cheaper on DraftKings and still was within, shouting distance of Vucevic's total score. So with that percentage and the ownership difference, things I was talking about before that separates certain players in tournaments as opposed to 50-50s. Evan Fournier is not a cash game or 50-50 or a heads up necessarily, but he would have made for an absolute fantastic tournament play tonight, and it's one of the guys I wish I was on a little bit more.
Okay, what about the expensive guys? Because I always hear some people like to build their team with a handful of really cheap guys and then really expensive guys. How does that side of things work, either from a reverse engineering standpoint or just from a general standpoint? Does it make sense in the tournament format versus the 50-50 format to create a lineup of a whole bunch of mid-tier guys, or does it make more sense to create a lineup of you try to maximize the number of hyper-expensive superstars and then fill it around with really cheap guys that you hope can put up their value or better? How does that side of things kind of fit together like a puzzle?
So generally, you're going to look at the slate as a whole, and you're going to look at the amount of games that are on the slate as a whole, and then you're going to check out what superstars are on the slate. So tonight, for instance, we see that we had Giannis, and we also had LeBron on the slate. So Giannis was, LeBron was 10,500, I believe, on DraftKings, and Giannis was a little bit over 11. If I'm not mistaken. So those are the two priciest guys on the slate. So when you have to do the cost value, and if you're paying up for a guy like that, you have to understand that you're going to be sacrificing in other spots, and you have to know that you have the value that can make up for it. So as I said before, there wasn't a ton of value. I felt too secure about going into the night. Michael Kidd-Gilchrist was one of the guys that a lot of the experts and touts were on. I wasn't feeling fantastic about him. I did play him in one or two. Lance Stevenson being another one. It's not another guy I can feel completely comfortable about going in. So I went with the more middle-tiered approach tonight. There wasn't enough value for me to sneak in the studs. I mean, and up until the fourth quarter of the Knicks-Bucks game when Giannis started going bananas, it was looking like the best approach, and it still could be at the end of the night as things play out. Giannis had a great game and had 31 points, 15 rebounds, 4 assists. But at the end of the day, the people that paid for him, they pay for him for a reason. So when you avoid those guys, you're hoping that they just reach their value or they cut short of it, and then there's enough of those $7,000, $8,000, $6,000 players on board that you think can really hit the value. And tonight, for me, those players I was really high on Kawhi Leonard. And if that game, looking back on it, wasn't a blowout, wasn't so out of reach the entire game, but you easily would have got there. I was really high on Butler, and again, Butler had a great game. He just didn't do it in the peripherals. He didn't get enough assists. He didn't get enough rebounds. Could have had a couple more steals and blocks. I was high on Middleton. Middleton had a great game. Cantor was another guy I was very high on. Chris Dunn, Levine. You had all those guys later on in the Spurs game with Aldridge and DeRozan. So there was enough guys in that middle tier between the $6,000 and $8,000 range where I felt comfortable playing 3 or 4 of those rather than one of the superstars and only one or two of those guys in the mid-tier range. So you have to evaluate the slate as a whole. And at the end of the day, it's whatever you feel most comfortable with going into the end of the night. You're putting money on these lineups. You can listen to any expert, but you have to feel comfortable. And you have to make sure that, depending on the contest, that this is the best lineup for this contest. And again, I'm not trying to plug myself, but if you do have a subscription to
you
our site here,
you should plug yourself. By the way,
some of my articles where I explain it in the DFS Beginner's Guide of how to play these contests and the differences in similarities as well, and how to transfer that season-long DFS or season-long knowledge you had into DFS knowledge. Because just like any season-long person, that's how we all started. We all started just loving fantasy basketball, and then we heard of this crazy thing called DFS, and we wanted to give it a shot. So, I mean, that's probably the basic suggestions I'd have from tonight's slate. If I had to look back and change a few things, the main differences between going from an expensive player to maybe that middle tiered, but it really depends on, I'd say, the basics of the night, looking at the most expensive guys compared to the best value that you feel comfortable with.
I think that's a good spot to put a pin in the DFS conversation. And by the way, you should plug yourself. That's part of the reason that I'm having you guys on this podcast. He's at Mike Apotria on Twitter. Hey, let me ask you a couple things about the regular fantasy stuff going on right now, as long as I've got you for a few more minutes. We're a week into the season. It's overreaction time. What do you think so far? Have you had to talk anybody off a ledge yet? Have you hit the panic button yourself on anyone? What's jumping out at you after 1 week of basketball?
Well, I had probably about 7 texts up until this morning from good friends of mine who know I love fantasy basketball, complaining about Jonathan Isaac and why'd you tell him to draft me late in the draft? He's going to be a bust. And I'm like, just hold on a second, guys. He's playing limited minutes. This guy's a stud. He's a unicorn. He produces. Oh, I don't know. I'm going to feel good tomorrow when I get some texts. He's one guy that I had to talk some people off of. I was very high on going into the year. This guy's showing that he can produce in every category across the board. And it's also showing that, maybe some people may have reached on Aaron Gordon a little early if these rebounds aren't going to be available between Isaac, Vucevic, and Gordon. Those are 3 big rebounders, and it's going to be a toss-up on nights for them, all 3.
Yeah, Jonathan Isaac looked amazing in this basketball game on Monday night. It was on NBA TV, and I couldn't get my NBA League Pass to turn on today. Spectrum was being weird. I'm gonna have to call him and make sure that works. But I did manage to get this ball game. Cold-blooded Jonathan Isaac, a pump fake 3, step in for a long 2 when Orlando was up I think they were up 1 late in this ball game.
He got hot.
That was beautiful. That was like, who is this kid? Are we sure he didn't play more than 18 minutes last year in an injury-plagued rookie season? Yeah, he's a hoop ball guy for sure, and it's just nice because here's the thing, though. With young guys, it's going to be up and down. He could come back with a clunker in the next ball game, and then you're going to get those text messages again. It's what I like to call Danny Green syndrome, which is you just have to close your eyes sometimes and not look at each individual box score and just trust that at the end of a couple of weeks or at the end of a month or 2 months or whatever it is, everything's going to be right where it should be. This is no panic season, ladies and gentlemen. So everybody, please just calm down. Last question for you, Mike, and I'm going to put you on the hot seat with this one. I didn't tell you to prepare for this particular question. I told you to be ready for DFS. But, I don't know, maybe you got something up your sleeve. You're a degenerate, which I've determined here after a few minutes of conversation. And that is
Let's do it.
Something you're looking for towards the next couple of weeks. Is there somebody that people have forgotten about? Is there somebody that maybe people should be selling high or buying low on? Maybe what's the one... I always hate this question. People are like, what's the one thing? Because it's impossible to pick one. But anything that pops into your head when I say to you, kind of albatrosses here in the early part of the season, something standing out as wrong that's going to correct itself in the not-too-distant future.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I definitely
tough
have
one.
a few off the top of my head, I'd have to say. One thing that I've noticed over the first few games, and even more so tonight, is that Willie Hernan-Gomez is the best center for the Charlotte Hornets, and it's not even close anymore. Watching this game, I think they're slowly starting to figure it out. Zeller only played, I believe, 15 minutes tonight. I expect that to correct itself, and those that are hanging on to Willie Hernan-Gomez in the not too distant future might be able to seek the rewards if he's available in your free agency. I'm not saying go and pick him up just yet. It might take another week, might take 2 weeks, 3 weeks. He's definitely someone worth keeping an eye on, stashing, watch listing, whatever you need to do. But he's a guy that if he gets the 30 minutes a night, he's a double-double machine. He can hit threes, he rebounds, he blocks, he steals. He can easily produce top 40, 50 caliber stats if he's playing at least 30 minutes a night, and he's somebody I'm keeping my eye on.
Yeah, and they got smoked. There's so many blowouts the first week of the year. I don't think that's unusual either. I think that's a fairly common occurrence when teams are kind of finding a rhythm among themselves, and so you've got all these weird games where guys are not playing the right number of minutes, and you're trying to make split-second calls on what to actually do with them, like Indiana. I think they finally had a game where the starters played 30-plus minutes tonight and managed to score a whopping 91 points, so it didn't help our cause much. But, you know, if you've got guys that where the minutes seem unusual this first week of the season, that's another good reason to just sit on things for a minute. My own guy, by the way, that I'm going to throw into this mix is Wes Matthews. I feel like he's owned almost nowhere, and he's just sitting there playing a ton of minutes for a kind of a bad Mavericks team. I feel like he could be had as like the ultimate late-round old man, and I don't really know why nobody's picking him. I know the shooting percentage is not that great, but anyway, that's my guy I'll throw into the mix. Again, this is Mike Apotria. He is a DFS expert here at Hoopball, hoop-ball.com. You can get his stuff, as he mentioned, in the draft guide. And throughout the season, you've got DFS cards you put out, right?
Oh, definitely. Every Friday I write an article. I try to have it up there by 2 or 3. Sometimes, depending on the slate and the news, I try to produce the most up-to-date content possible. So I might wait an extra hour if I'm waiting on some very specific news I know is coming out. I also try to appear in as many podcasts as possible now. I mean, I went out and I bought myself my new mic. I had an old one. It wasn't up to par. I got myself a new mic, a nice stand set up, everything like that. So I'm looking to use this stuff this season and get more involved in the podcast situation because, let's face it, we're all busy. Sometimes throwing the headphones in once in a while and getting your information on the go is the easiest way to do it. And
that's what I'm talking about. You're tugging at my heartstrings with that stuff over there, with that schmaltz. I love it. Next time on the podcast, Mike, we're going to we'll do a morning recording and we will create an actual card. How does that sound?
I'm looking forward to it. That's my favorite. Sometimes, talking out loud, I even do it with some of my buddies who are just getting involved and I'm just trying to give them a hand and they're asking me for some help and some advice on the slate, just talking about it out loud, bouncing ideas back and forth with another person. Going over the slate as a whole is the easiest way to do it. And I have a feeling, we're going to have some fun doing it, and maybe we can get some people to jump into a contest with us once in a while.
Yeah, get me into one of them $1 leagues.
That's what I'm talking about.
Thank you, Mike. I really appreciate you taking the time, and everybody else, stay tuned for DFS 102. That'll be the next course in this long list. That'll get us through this 2018-2019 campaign. Mike, thanks again.
Thanks for having me, Dan. I had a great time.
I should mention also at the end of this interview with Mike that he has a coupon code available over at hoop-ball.com. You can get the in-season premium membership for $3 off with the coupon code. Mike, what was it?
DFS Mike.
DFS Mike. You heard it here. Mike, one last
Can't
time.
forget it.
Thanks again.
Thank you, Dan. You guys have a good night or morning whenever you're listening.
Big thank you to Mike Apotria for hopping on the podcast. We'll talk to him soon, as mentioned. And as you heard, DFS Mike is your coupon code. Go use it. Get $3 off the in-season premium membership at Hoopball. You go to hoop-ball.com, click on the premium tab, choose Go Premium, and then you've got the list of things available. The one that we've been talking about is in-season membership. That one, I believe, started at $30 off for the entire 6-month season. So it's basically $5 a month, but it's $5 off right now, and it's $3 off with the coupon code. So you can get the whole season for $22, if I'm doing my math right, which I think I am. It's worth it. $22 for 6 months of premium written content. So pickups, drops, all that good stuff, strategic breakdown articles. And maybe the most important thing that we offer here at Hoopball on the premium side is effectively one-on-one interaction with Hoopball pros. Every night, we have a premium video cast where 2 of Hoopball's best will host a chat on YouTube, and premium members can just go in there and drop their questions in, specifically to your own team. Hey, this is my team. I got these 12 guys. This is the dude at the end of my bench. Should I drop him for Josh Hart? And the pros will be like, okay, let me assess your team and give you an answer. It's literally for your team, and it's literally in real time. And that's Monday through Thursday. Friday, of course, Brewski and I have our live show, which kind of doubles up in terms of the chat room effectiveness. We also have live forum chats for premium members. We've got the waiver wire show on Sundays. We've got a weekly lineup show on Mondays. It's so interactive, and other sites are not doing that. It's foolish, frankly, that they're not. They should be doing more of it, but here we are. Hoopball's taking the step first, and you guys should enjoy it because it's cheap. It's $4 and change dollars. No, it's less, $3 and change dollars a month. Am I getting that right? Yeah. $367, I think. And it's great. So check that out. Hoop-ball.com. Go premium. Use DFS Mike as your coupon code. What's coming up on the slate tonight, ladies and gentlemen? A very short slate on this Tuesday evening. Just 3 ball games. Philadelphia is in Detroit to take on the Pistons. Detroit favored by 1 in this matchup. Wow, the mighty have fallen. Suddenly everybody's fading the 76ers. New Orleans favored by 6.5 points at home over the Los Angeles Clippers. And the Nuggets laying 11.5 against the Kings. Denver has shown some excellent defensive chops in the early going so far this year. Sacramento playing better than people expected. New Orleans looks unreal on the offensive side of the ball so far. And, of course, when they want to crank it up on defense, AD and Drew Holiday are both really, really good. Detroit, I don't know, man. I'm not sold on them yet. They are way, way better with Reggie Jackson healthy. That's a big key for them. They're chucking away. So far on the gambling side that I haven't wanted to touch too many things. This is a part of the year where you're just learning what teams truly are. We had a couple of really strong leans the second day of the year. Both of those ended up being successful. But other than that, not a whole lot that I want to go on. I like to get into the grind when you really start to feel the teams out. And admittedly, the lines are probably farther off from where they should be right now, but there's so much variability from game to game that unless you've got inside info, this is a weird time. We talked about going some unders on the first day of the year when nobody could shoot. Now the pace is so crazy. The totals are all being adjusted upward. It's just things are bouncing around right now. So I'm not putting any bets down, not for a little bit, just offering some quick thoughts on things for those of you that are. I think Detroit has a pretty good shot in this one. Andre Drummond is one of the few guys in the league that can at least give Joel Embiid a couple of things to think about. Not going to stop him, but he can't slow him down. Probably no Ben Simmons, and they didn't look the same without him on the floor. And so I think you have to give a slight lean to Detroit in this ballgame because they don't have the floor spacing that they had last year, Philadelphia, that is. And so without Simmons to go get him a whole bunch of easy buckets, it's going to be a ton of Embiid. And that could also be a ton of turnovers and easy looks for the other team. So I do have a slight lean to Detroit. Surprised, honestly, that New Orleans is not favored by more against the Clippers, who have been playing okay. And Clippers is a team where I liked the over this year, but the weird one. And then Sacramento, Denver, to me, we're still feeling this thing out a little bit, and you guys know how much I like to avoid the Sacramento Kings, just in terms of knowing what the hell they're going to do on a night-to-night basis. From a fantasy standpoint, what are we looking for tonight? Well, not much on Philadelphia, a team that we have a pretty good feel for. Detroit, on the other hand, Stanley Johnson, Reggie Bullock, that's kind of the contingent that I've got my eye on. Can those guys hold consistent value? I believe Bullock will. I think he's going to be right on the edge in 12-team formats as he hits threes and gets you a couple steals and hopefully does it on decent enough percentages. The guy that knocks down a bunch of threes without torpedoing your field goal percent is a nice commodity. We talked about Wesley Matthews earlier on this podcast. He's a guy that hits a ton of threes and does torpedo your field goal percent. So he's a guy where you kind of need to counterbalance it. You need to counterweight that on your team. With Bullock, maybe you don't need to quite as much. We'll see. He may settle back into a lower number this year. Clippers, we're still watching all the position battles on that thing. I don't trust the centers enough to run any of them out. Montrez, Gortat, and Marjanovic, there's just too many of them. And kind of the same deal in the backcourt right now. Although I maintain Pat Beverly is eventually going to see more time. I think he's shaking the rust off. I think we've seen a couple of nice performances from Gilgeous-Alexander. But I also think that there's going to be sort of a peel back there where you see the rookies, they come out, they surprise some people, then there's the game planning, the adjustment. It all happens over the course of one season's arc. But Beverly is their guy. He's their insane defender who changes things. They might end up start blending Gilgeous-Alexander. They might even start giving him time at the 2. Although we've seen that, I think, alongside Lou Williams when they need some more scoring out there. So I still maintain, I think Patrick Beverly is going to be okay this year. He's close. A lot of his games so far have sort of been close to being good games. But I'm not starting him at present. He's on my bench as I wait to see how that shakes out. I don't think Gilgeous-Alexander is going to do enough from a fantasy standpoint to be relevant. Avery Bradley is a drop. I think he's officially an old man who just got old. And that's fine because you probably took him in your last round anyway. And then obviously Gallo and Tobias Harris are the guys that you can start with confidence. Sacramento, Denver. There's nothing really on the New Orleans side. Sacramento remains kind of an interesting piece of this tapestry so far this year. My No Kings Allowed sign is on the verge of coming down from the treehouse because it looks like De'Aaron Fox is going to get the leash to just go and put up some big numbers. What we haven't seen is perfect consistency at the other spots on the floor. Buddy Hield seeing minutes between 22 and 30. That's a big fluctuation. Marvin Bagley, minutes between like 10 and 30. That's big-time fluctuation. Willie Cauley-Stein has seen a lot of fluctuation. And we still don't even have Bogdan back on the floor. So I might be making that Simpsons joke, which some of you probably get this. Do you guys remember the sequence where Homer is not allowed in the treehouse because the sign says no Homers allowed? And he says, well, but Homer so-and-so is in. And the guy says, that's right. It says no Homers allowed. So my No Kings Allowed sign might mean that there's one king allowed in the treehouse, but then the other ones are still on thin ice. So it looks like De'Aaron Fox is good to go. Honestly, I'm not that sad that I missed out on the one king that has been super reliable so far. Buddy Hield has put up pretty good numbers, but again, the minutes have been moving. It's all a moving target with this team. But if they're going to play at the pace that they're playing at, then we might let a few more into the treehouse. I'm thinking about it. With Denver, we're still watching to see if anybody can pick up the Will Barton slack. We now know he's going to be out for over a month. I think the report was 4 to 5 weeks, which to me feels low for a big hip issue. I mean, I think he had to have surgery, if I'm not mistaken. I might have misread that, though. Either way, 4 weeks for that feels like superhuman. That's like Wolverine style. So someone's got to pick up the slack. I think we're all hoping it's Trey Lyles, but as of their last game, it was nobody. It was just Jokic and Gary Harris. And that's what we're watching for tonight on this short Tuesday card. That's basically your podcast, folks, although as I do at the end of every show these days, I get down on bended knee and I ask you, please subscribe to the pod, whatever service you're using. iTunes obviously being the big one. If you're getting this via an Apple product, please subscribe to the podcast. And if you like what you hear, drop us a rating or a review. That's also helpful. But the subscriptions are the biggest piece of the puzzle. That is what moves it up the charts. Listens and subscriptions, amazingly. That's what moves things up the charts. And the more of those we get, the more of them we can get. And you're a big part of that. So thank you to everybody again for listening. Appreciate it every day, every night. Whenever I check the listenership numbers, I appreciate it. I am Dan Besbris. One more big thank you to Mike Apotria for hopping on and giving us DFS lesson number 1. Have a great Tuesday, everybody. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.